Welcome back to the International Kindness Festival 2021. Coming up next, we have a panel discussion with 4 extraordinary speakers. Payal Kapoor is a disability inclusion evangelist, having lost her eyesight and partial hearing. Maya Soni is a member of the Periphery Foundation. Maya is a human rights activist who works with the trans and intersex community. Shweta Katti, who you heard from just before the break, is a UN Courage Award winner and the first girl from an Indian red light area to study abroad. Nandini Murli is an author and certified life coach who focuses on loss and transition, also a suicide prevention and mental health activist. Please do send us your questions and comments in the question tab. May I now invite Mahima Poddar to moderate this discussion that's titled, You Can Sit With Me, Examining Tolerance, Acceptance and Inclusion. Mahima, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. And welcome is a very strange word to use for this particular panel discussion. And the reason I say that is because we are talking about inclusivity here today. And we're talking about the challenges that people face in really, extending that inclusivity in their environment. People talk about it, and they would like to show that they are the kind of people who are tolerant and who don't indulge in marginalization. But when it comes to what goes down deep inside, we are still unsure. Sometimes we can. I think it's just ironic that here we are talking about inclusion, and it's a panel on inclusion, and my internet doesn't want me to be a part of this conversation. I'm not sure what's going on. But I was really hoping to trigger this conversation and start off by addressing the fact that, when I was researching all the different types of perspectives that people have on marginalization, inclusion, and all of these things, some of the topics that came primarily up there were, we're talking about inclusivity when it comes to women and different, the gender inclusions and the LGBTQ community inclusion. But people did not seem to think that there were other types of marginalizations and communities out there which were seeking to be seen as real, as human, and to be part of the community. We have, a group of speakers over here who represent the voices from communities which face marginalization either through their situations in life or through the experiences in life. So I will invite Maya. Are you online? Are you able to speak to us? Maya is having some bit of connectivity issues. I will move on and probably ask Nandini to speak up. Nandini, we know, I'm not sure if Suresh had a chance to introduce you because I kind of lost connectivity out there, but I think he has introduced you. So I know that the marginalization that you faced came from a situation in life. It was not something that you were born into, or not something that it's something that happened to you. And as a result of it, you found it difficult to find acceptance from people. And perhaps it was kind of a difficult situation for you to accept yourself for a while. Could you shed a little bit of light on how that experience was for you in terms of your journey, and also on the kindness or lack of it that was being expressed to you by people and yourself?
First of all, hello. Thank you, Mahima, for having me on this festival and this panel. I'd like to respond to your question with a metaphor. When I hear the word marginalization, what really comes up for me is a visual representation of marginalization. We all engage with books and notebooks. And one thing that strikes me very much is how little the margins are so narrow. And what's in the center of the book occupies, so to say, center stage, or it's in the limelight, and the margins are very, very narrow. That for me is what marginalization actually looks like, Before I even move to talking about what it feels like, it's like you're pushed away from the center onto the periphery, whether due to circumstances beyond your control, as what happened to me, or there are other reasons, so many reasons for marginalization. But the fact remains that we have been moved away from the periphery into the perimeter. which means that we are denied, our voices, our experiences are minimized, denied, trivialized, muted, and silenced. So, just imagine being in the margin. Even when we write on the margin, it's kind of very oppressive because there's so little space and there's so much you want to write or talk, but the space doesn't hold you. So that for me is a visual metaphor of what marginalization looks like. And that pretty much actually sums up, I'm sure, the lived experiences of all those of us who are engaging with various forms of marginalization. In my case, the marginalization I went through is I lost my husband to suicide, and I'm a survivor of suicide loss, and across the world, in most societies, I don't think there's any society where suicide is looked at with the compassion and the kindness it deserves. So it's taboo. So there's a lot of stigma, shame, secrecy, and toxic silence associated with it. And my husband was a well-known doctor. So the suicide, like all suicides, it was sudden, it's unanticipated. And for me, what struck me most was the huge empathy deficit and kindness deficit I experienced from everyone in my life, whether be it family, friends, colleagues. And actually, that was the moment when I realized who my friends were and who were the people I could count on. Simply because, and I think that also stems from the fact that suicide is a death like no other. I mean, it's not spoken about, or we don't have informed conversations about it. It's hushed, and there's a lot of hush hush around it. It's covered up. So it's a fertile breeding ground for marginalization in its worst form. So that was a very iconic moment for me. And I work with the most marginalized communities. But yet, when I look back, I think my understanding of marginalization until I experienced it myself was purely cognitive. And even the empathy I thought I showed for the communities I worked with, I realized was a very cognitive construct. I say this because only when you really had a lived experience of marginalization do we really, feel what marginalization could look like. Otherwise, we never really get it, and that for me was a very humbling moment.
I'm going to expand on that a little bit and move on to Payal. Payal, I know that the kind of loss that you experienced was very different from what Nandini has experienced, and yet you have things to share about. We know you lost, your vision, but what were the other things you lost? I know there's some more things that felt much deeper by you, right? What else did you lose when you lost your vision?
Hi, Mahima. Thank you so much for having me here. I think disability takes from you your sense of self. It takes a whole person away from you, because you are no longer a whole person. You might not feel like that, basically because you have suddenly a sense missing. But at the same time, the world makes it so much more apparent to you that you have more than just a sense missing. And I think it was beautifully said by Nandini about being marginalized and that space that you're left in to grapple with both the tragedy, the loss of you, of your own self, your own identity, and everything else, relationships, career. There is so much loss and so rampant, and it's ravaging because people simply plow through you. You get thrown in the corner with this entire idea that the world lives in, that the minute you're a person that is disabled, that you don't count. You are no longer somebody who comes in the, again, to quote Nandini, in the mean in the center of the page, in the center of the stage. You're just somebody who's left to languish on your own, for want of a better word. And it's extremely difficult to find your way back, because in my case, I was at the cusp of a fabulous career, something that I had worked so hard for through my life. I lost the career in the blink of an eye. I lost friends because I was not just totally blind, I was totally deaf as well for a period of almost 5 months. So people who I was around regularly had no idea what to do with me. They didn't know how to communicate with me. They didn't know, and I was physically disfigured at that point in time. With all that had happened, I didn't look like I do today. So even that whole aspect, I actually wanted to hide my face. I didn't want anybody to see me. And while there was kindness from family, but there were people who were around who, not for any other reason, but just didn't know how to handle the entire thing. And I was sitting plumb in the middle of, a family event where the entire family was around, and I had gone for some tests and things like that. It was devastating to be 22 and to, feel the way I was and everything. I actually had friends who connected with me many, many years later and told me that we couldn't come to you because we didn't know how to handle you. And I have this question for most people. What do you mean by handling? You handle pets, you handle situations. The word handling is, again, something that is very, very loosely used. And I don't need to be handled. But that's exactly how they thought it was, that I needed to be handled, like something that was probably fragile, that would probably splinter at a touch. So they had absolutely no idea what to do with me. And I was pushed into this corner from where I had no idea how I was going to bring myself out of it. And that, I think, as a youngster, looking back today, 28 years, I think I lost the best years of my life. A time where people, plan their lives. I had a life planned. I had a career planned. I had a relationship planned. I had a marriage and a home planned, everything around the corner, but everything simply fell apart like a pack of cards. So in a manner of speaking, for a period in time, my vision loss and my hearing, which eventually did recover partially, took from me everything that was me. So I think that pretty much sums up how it was.
Thank you, Payal. That was very heartfelt. Thank you so much. Shweta, both Nandini and Payal had instances which made them feel lost, right? They experienced loss because of an instant, something happened, and thereafter their experiences commenced due to that momentary experience. So, but yours is a different scenario. It's not like there was one incident or one thing that happened which made you experience the marginalization that you probably felt. So, but I wanted to ask you that throughout, the life journey that you've been through, you must have felt some situations, some instances where you thought that, there was loss involved, that, what kind of experiences were you feeling, kept away from or not being a part of, or what kind of people, or were there any opportunities that you were not able to be a part of? And of course, people have biases against or biases about the sex workers community to start with. So there are obvious ones that come to my mind. But from your perspective, are there any deeper insights you can give us, and for people to really understand what goes on and what are the kinds of losses that you experience that we don't even consider, no one else thinks about?
Self-worth and self-confidence and acceptance. I think these are the losses I was born into, but the journey has been very incredible. So I found my way to it, and therefore it's much more important now. But yeah, I don't know where it began because I was just there all along, but I did always feel separate from the normal or the center stage, as Nandini said. Felt different all along in school, and I actually did go to school in a municipality school where there would be kids from normal families, so to say, but also from poverty, not like, rich or something. So there were some things we shared as well, but there were many things, I felt left out for a long time. But the fact is, I wasn't really. I mean, there was so much more to cherish within the community. But because of the conditioning that my community is horrible, or, like these thoughts that were pushed into my own thinking, like conditioned even me, I didn't enjoy the joys of, I had a community where women took care of us when my mother was away, where we were fed amazing food and looked after. It was a community, but I didn't appreciate it. And that was taken away. Or I don't know, taken away or wasn't there. And I think what I would call normal childhood, but honestly, I don't know if I miss it. Like, because I think where I've been has given me so much more. Then I don't know if I'd rather be somewhere else. But I think it was made worse because of certain labels, certain stigmas, and certain ways that people treated us. And I also looked down upon my own self. I never really thought myself as worthy. And so, I think that was something that was not there. Yeah. And so thank you so much, Payal and Nandini, for sharing your stories. It's really inspiring and very touching.
Thank you. Thank you to you too, Shweta. Is Maya online with us? Is she able to have an audio feed? Okay, I'm not sure she does. All right, we can continue and hope.
Hi, Mahima.
Maya, you're there. Wonderful. Lovely to hear from you. I understand you're having network issues, so as long as we can hear from you, that would be wonderful. Shweta was just talking about feelings of self-worth and feelings of, your self-confidence, all of that either not being there or being robbed from you. And I was just wondering if you had any light to share on how that, were those aspects of you challenged? And if they were, then how did you experience them? And of course, like I was telling Shweta as well, the outside world already has an idea of, oh, these are probably the thoughts that you go through, or these are the experiences you go through. But from your perspective, is there something that you would like to shine a light on in terms of your experiences and your challenges?
Yeah, definitely. And first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. I heard both Payal their life, and totally I agree with them. And mostly I do compare myself with the Payal story, because I faced the same issues what she faced in her life, and I can say that I lost myself when I was doing my college. I was sexually harassed by my faculty, and I tried a lot to come out of, like I was into stress and mentally affected, physically affected. I have gone through many treatments also. As an intersex person, most of the people always used to isolate me, whether I fit into female or a male, and then people call me as a trans woman. Previous days and all, I used to think a lot. So how should I call me, and why the people are calling me like that? But nowadays, okay, it happens. Or if they're calling me as male, it's okay. It's up to them. I'm not reacting, because I know that what I am. Previous days, to come out of those things, I practice visualization. So like which was not happened to me. I used to think in that way, but nowadays at the end of the day, and at some point I thought it won't work for me, so that made me too strong. And then I decided to, okay, this in the certain margin, boundary and all, I want to come out and I want to live on my own because it's my life. Thinking about the past is just like wasting the future too. So I faced many, and then currently, okay, I'm feeling okay. Totally, I wasted many days, many years.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you.
Even I worked in a, yeah.
Hopefully she will be joining us as soon as she can. So I know we talked a little bit briefly about how loss was experienced in each of your different scenarios, but life is always about the good and the bad. There's the beautiful and the ugly. So I'm just wondering, was there any unexpected gains, anything that, any bouquets, any good thing that came your way that you did not imagine? But of course, all of you today are in spaces where you have made something valuable out of your experiences, and you're able to impact others. You're inspiring a lot of other people. So what were those things that you held on to or that came along your way, your inspirations, or what I like to call the bouquets, that came from above, that helped you in your journey to bring you where you are? Perhaps I can ask, we can go the other way around. Maybe I can ask Shweta to speak first.
Only good has come out of where I've come from for me. And bad has come from outside, where I've been made believe something that was not true. But from the community, I don't think there was something, the experiences and the love and kindness of people and to think beyond myself was always there. Like, women didn't have their personal families, but my mother was a factory worker. My aunt was a sex worker. I lived in a brothel. I had 2 other sisters, and we were taken care of by the community. And so the sense of community, I feel, is, I think, the biggest gift that the community has given me. And the connection, and to think beyond, because our doors would always be open. Like, I go into buildings and I see like locked doors, and I see like there is no energy going around in these apartment buildings. But where we lived, the doors were always open. Of course, at night, they would put the doors would close because they didn't want sex workers to run away. But during the day, the food was passed from one house to another house to make sure, like, to taste what other kind of cuisine that someone has made. So I think this love and this care for each other, I think that has been the gift, and that I carry forward. And the fact that only because where I'm from, I could have not that I've achieved something, but I've received a lot. And only the fact is, before I was denied because where I came from, but the same thing gave me many more opportunity, and not just opportunities as in material, but emotional support for myself. And I think, it's just funny how things can change when perspective change.
When your perspective changes, that's so true. Payal, what about you? I know we've talked about this at length, and you were telling me that, there were all these losses, but then there were all these gains that I had. Could you share with us a little bit about that, please?
I think in every loss is a gain, in every adversity is an opportunity. That is something that I say every time now. Every time I have to talk, sitting today, that's my mantra. In every adversity lies an opportunity. It's a matter of opening your minds to it. I think after the entire phase of denial, where for over 6 years I sat waiting to probably be able to see again and to do things again and whatever. Somewhere along the line, I think I just gave up, and I decided it was better to start thinking of my own. I think what I gained over there, it's a dichotomy in a way, because just as I said that I had lost everything, I had gained everything as well. The same sense of self that was lost at the time in the first few years that I felt and I experienced, I realized was a manifestation of my own inner self. It wasn't so much that was coming from the outside or from the world beyond, but from within me. And as my strength grew, as my hearing came back, and despite suffering the loss of having lost the man I was supposed to marry, and all of that set aside, I realized that there was so much more to who I was as a person. And everything that I had lost was just in my own head. And once that sense of acceptance came, there's an analogy that I also often think of, is when you hit rock bottom, the only way is up. You can't go anywhere else beyond rock bottom. You have to come up. So that is, I think, where I had my aha moment at some point in time, and I got tired of being, coddled, and tired of being treated with kid gloves, and that, this one is going to be, I don't know whether she's going to laugh or cry or bite or what. So all of that, those experiences, that finally I got tired. And once I got tired, and I realized that I wanted to actually see what would happen next, is when the opportunity started happening. That's when the realization that there was a life beyond my blindness, beyond my disability. I have always had a fabulous support system in my family, in my friends, some of the close friends who dared to constantly keep coming back and prodding me and pushing me and saying, okay, it's time for rehab, it's time for rehab. And there were the braver ones who kept coming back. And ultimately I gave in, because I saw the merit in moving ahead. And with all those hands that held me, I learned to stand, I learned to walk again, and then eventually learned to fly. So I think it's been an incredible journey of so much loss, but so much more gain. I think I'm a different person. I'm a better person today than I would have probably been if I were just leading a general, a life like anybody else, not taking away anything from anyone else's life. But in my own case, when I think back, I think my life would have been pretty routine. But at this point, looking back, I think it's incredible to think of where my life has brought me, where hardships have brought me, where adversity has brought me. And I think eventually I'm simply grateful for everything that has come my way, the kindness, the support, and it has brought me here today.
Okay. Before I ask you, Nandini, I just want to let our audience know that please feel free to type your questions in, and if you want to address them to any particular person in the panel or a general question to the panel, we'll take it right after Nandini tells me about the bouquets of her life, the good things, and despite the big loss, you've covered a long journey in a very short period of time, Nandini, and I really salute you for that. So can you tell us what helped you along this journey?
Sure. Thank you, Mahima. I resonated so much with what Payal said that I found myself nodding and said, oh yeah, that's exactly how it is. So coming back to my situation, the primary loss was the sudden death of my spouse. But what I wasn't prepared, or what was not anticipated, was the myriad secondary losses. Like loss of relationships, which I thought were sacred to me, loss of friendships, a loss of status in society. My husband was a very well-known doctor. So I was married to medicine actually for 30 odd years. So there was this loss of that community. In fact, I say that I miss medicine as much as I miss my late husband. So there were many tangible and intangible losses. I mean, the catalog is endless. But that said, I realized that this was a situation. What happened to me was something beyond my control. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't have done anything about it. But where I had every choice, where my agency and my autonomy were alive and kicking, was my how do I choose to respond to it? That's where I had 100% choice, and I was determined not to be a victim. I said, and suicide, as most of us know, it's rife with speculation and gossip. Everyone sort of arrogates the right to what they think has happened to you, and that sort of horrified me. I'm a writer, so I said, whose story is it anyway? How does anyone even arrogate to themselves the right to tell my story without knowing anything of what happened? So therefore, I said the first step in really turning into a very empowered woman who refused to let this horrifying circumstance cow me down was to reclaim my space, reclaim my narrative, reclaim my right to tell the story as I wanted to. And to sort of, reclaim my space, to live the life the way I want to, and not live other people's lives in my head. So, and of course, what I'm saying today is it's not as easy as it sounds. The journey has been very non-linear. It goes in spirals, one step forward, 1,000 steps backward, you falter. And of course, in the initial stages, it's very comforting to be a victim. Oh, poor me, I didn't deserve it. And, it's so unfair to just lament about how unfair life is. But I do acknowledge that as an essential part of my journey. And for me, that was very, very important, not to berate myself for feeling like a victim, though ultimately I didn't want to be a victim. But that was also to acknowledge that, well, this is part of the journey. And for me, another thing which also worked was, and this is something I'm increasingly reflecting, it's not the adversity or the challenge that causes us to grow. It's, I think, the way we respond and perceive that challenge. In every adversity, in every opportunity is a seed for exceptional growth. And I think modern psychological research terms that as post-traumatic growth, and I think all of us here in this panel, we've been impacted by trauma. And some of us never saw it coming. But then what do you do? How do you respond to that? I think I've grown enormously in ways I never thought was capable. I've not only bounced back, I've actually bounced forward and reached out to society, reached out to people impacted by suicide loss with my work in prevention and postvention for survivors of suicide loss. And writing is what I know best. So it was all about transmuting that pain into purpose, transforming that shoka or sorrow into shloka or poetry. So, it's been actually, despite the pain, I think the pain has been just a catalyst. It's been something that set me off. But when I engage with this work, or when I wrote my book, I did not write from that place of pain. But it was like from a space of a lot of, we call it samasthiti, equilibrium. I experienced a myriad range of emotions, but when I wrote, when I create, it was like from a space of tremendous joy and wonder, because I think that's what will resonate with my readers. And despite it all, it is a very, very beautiful world. So my journey has been all about transmuting and transforming through tragedy, through loss, moving through the loss. I doubt if I will ever move on. That's I think a very simplistic and a very reductionist understanding of what most of us go through. But yes, I move forward. I move through the loss. And I've also learned to honor the past. While I don't cling to the past, it's a huge part of where I am, of who I am. And my being a survivor of suicide loss, I don't want to wear it as a badge of honor. It doesn't define me, limit me, or restrict me in any way. It's a huge part of who I am today, but it's just a part of who I am. There is much more to me than this experience. And for me, that's been the journey.
Thank you so much.
And I must also add, I loved what Shweta said about the tribe. And I think for me, it was all about cultivating a sangha or a tribe around me of people who've been so unconditionally supportive of my journey. People who had the courage to walk with me and say that we're there for you no matter what. I hope they're all listening to this today, but they are my family right now. And for me, this whole thing has also told me that family doesn't need to be based only on kinship. And for every person who betrayed my love, trust, and faith, there have been so many people who've actually restored it. And it's also about dealing with this whole thing with zero bitterness, and that causes that calls for a lot of self-awareness. And because it's so easy to be angry with the world, with the others, with circumstance, but it's also so important to let go. So that's where I am.
Nandini, that's so inspiring. You know, in fact, early on in the conversation, when you first started speaking, we had a question from the audience. Sucheta Dev wanted to know how you came to terms with your reality and how did you accept it. And I think you just so beautifully answered that question in what you were just saying, because there is no one way of doing this, right? Like you said, it's a spiral and it goes round and you have to keep at it. And that also kind of resonates with what Payal and Shweta have been talking about. I'm just curious, has Maya been able to join us? I would love to hear her inputs on her journey and the positive influences and impacts that people have had on her. Do we know if Maya has joined us?
Yeah, previously I said I faced many sorrows, but after once I approached the periphery and a few more organization, by coordinating list around 20K people about the LGBT. And one thing which happened to me is I tried the things many times to change the things better for me. I always keep on trying. Even many tried to stop me, but they got tired. But I never kept quiet and changed most of the things into better. To say, I hear people that after the sensitization programs and all, and even the periphery, most of the people are saying that, yeah, you have proven yourself, and that I want to be like you. By hearing these words, I feel like I'm living with in 24/7, living with a different family, with a lot of love and affection, and which is more than enough for me. I feel very happy because of this. And even recently there is an organization named Let's Get Better Together organization. So they have chosen me as a representative for Andhra Pradesh, Telangana and Odisha. So I feel happy about it.
Very nice. So I just wanted to ask all of you, since we are talking about expanding people's understanding of what it feels like to be on the other side of the spectrum, and how we receive it, how we experience it from this side, the different various forms of non-inclusivity. If there is one message, and any of you can go first in this, if there is one message that you want to give to society on how they, and I will not use the word handle because that's the wrong word, clearly, how they approach you, what is their attitude towards you, or people who even want to help with good intentions, but sometimes it misses the mark, right? It kind of does the opposite of what they're intending to do. So if there was some word of advice you could give to people who are truly well-intentioned and would like to help or would like to support in some way, and B, just in general, not people with any intentions, but just how people regard you or how they treat you, is there any message that people can hold on to? Because I know that people would love to be able to be more appropriate, be more inclusive, but sometimes they just don't know how. And any word of guidance or inputs that you can give from your end would be greatly helpful. So any one of you can go first.
Can I go first?
Sure, Nandini.
I think we sort of tend to live in silos in such a binary world, in an either or mode. I think true inclusion and would be shifting to a spectrum and, embracing the bandwidth. How do we increase our bandwidth to include people who are very different from us? I always think that differences need to be honored and respected, and differences can never be the basis of discrimination. And I also think most of us, our knee-jerk response tends to be judgmental. We live in such a normative world. So I think it's so crucial for us to expand our horizons and truly develop the art of listening to others, listening to other experiences, even though they are so different from ours, because I feel the wounded heart responds in such similar ways. And I think beneath our differences, we're all so similar. So, and it doesn't cost much to really, you know, how do I say? Beautiful definition of love I've read. Love is extending your boundaries for another person. So what prevents us? It's just our own internalized sense of um, uh, what is normal and what is abnormal. So I think we need to step out of our own the confines of our own making. Yeah, and just drop those judgments. I'm really wondering whether we'd ever be able to live in a zero judgment world. But I think that to me seems very, very crucial. Thank you.
So Nandini, you've talked about dropping judgments, dropping and expanding our
bandwidth,
expanding our bandwidth and expanding the love, basically. Just open the heart out and extend it to extend it more and more. We can't say where it ends because it ideally shouldn't end anywhere.
Exactly, and lead a very heart-centric life.
A heart-centric life. Yes.
Yes.
But what anybody else wants to chip in on?
I'd like to say something here. I think conversations like what we're having today, many conversations, many interactions. I always tell people, ask questions, ask me, and I'll tell you. Don't assume, don't think for me, just ask. Because it's the simplest thing you can do. And that can only come when, exactly like Nandini says, you broaden your horizons, you open your mind, and you look at another person who's different from you, just as that, different. So what if I'm different? I'm still human. I'm still made of the same material you are. Just because for some reason, some quirk of fate, of whatever one would like to label that, I'm different, doesn't mean that, I'm unapproachable or I'm somebody that you wouldn't touch with a barge pole. So conversations and ask questions.
So increase awareness by asking questions, really. Don't assume on my behalf.
Absolutely.
And also don't pretend like I'm not in the room.
Exactly.
Absolutely. While we've been talking, I've gotten some comments from some, on my messaging on the side where they say that, you've forgotten one community, which, every single one of us is going to enter in that community at some point, and yet no one wishes to acknowledge. And that is the senior citizens community that, the older they get, they tend to face this sudden exclusion and, invisibility, which some of us are talking about. And it just kind of gave me a little, goosebumps here that really is something that, we didn't think about as much as we are trying to be more inclusive. But what about the senior citizens community? Absolutely. I just put that out there. But Shweta, you were saying something.
Yes, I wanted to add, because I come from a marginalized community, but sometimes I can also have inhibitions towards other marginalized communities. Because I feel these things are conditioned. What we don't do is we don't question them. We don't challenge them if they are true. We often just accept and behave how usually just normally accepted. And we don't investigate how many judgments that we've created we have in our minds are true. And I feel, and as I think Dini and Payal both said, I think no matter what the person is and how much they're different from you, I think one should respect them for sure, because coming from marginalized community, and I don't think anyone wants pity. I think everyone wants to be respected for who they are. And even if you can't love, which is understandable, sometimes it's difficult to really stretch that bandwidth. If you can, that's great. But if you can't, at least respect. And I think, and investigate for, I think that investigating how many of our mindsets are true and how many of them are just bogus and not in touch with reality of how, and really trying from oneself, like, and not, as Payal said, not assuming, because I think a lot of assumption goes into how we behave, and a lot of inhibitions, and like not being sure, because most of our thoughts are being conditioned by, you know, media or conversation of certain parts, certain people of our society who have powerful voices, but maybe not, you know, open heart. So so we listen to them and constantly agree with them, but we do not check if it's true or not. And I think I would really, even if you can't really expand your bandwidth right now, at least investigate that for me.
And you know, that's so important, because we don't even realize how many stereotypes that we condition into our brains and we take for granted. And like you rightfully said, coming from one community, I feel all of the heat, and yet I have my own stereotypical images of other communities, which I may or may not even be aware of. And to me, that's like such a reality check, that no matter how much we think that we are very open-minded, we're very inclusive, we love to have everybody in our mind space, in our heart space, and yet we surprise ourselves sometimes when we face certain situations. So to me, the biggest lesson and the biggest learning here is, accept that we don't know it all, and accept that no matter who or what I am, I'm still holding on to certain stereotypes and biases, which I'm probably not even aware of. It's still in my blind spot. So, it's good to keep an open mind and always let it be challenged. Maya, would you like to add something to that? Yes, please.
I totally agree with Payal, what she said, like instead of assuming someone, so we can ask the questions. But I strongly believe in, even if someone did something to us, we should know how, where, and what we to react, because it's not possible to react immediately in all the situations. So we should know how, where, and to react. And we should learn the self-analyzing, because if we work on it, we can change our weakness into strength also. We can prove ourselves. Never think about the backward step, always think about the forward.
So this message is really this is a very universal message, and it can, there's something in this for everyone to learn, because at some point or the other, we're all facing those challenges and those insecurities, and we invariably look outside. We always look for that support, that help, that helping hand to come from outside. But what you're saying is so important, that you first look inside, get the strength from within, and then things roll out, and then you might get it outwards as well. So since we don't have that much time left, I would like to address a couple of questions that are coming in. This one is for you, Nandini. Did you ever face guilt? And did you at any point hold yourself responsible for what happened? Your message to women who hold themselves responsible. I've always said that women, the middle name of every woman is guilt, because we find something to feel guilty about and we hold on to it. But in your special situation, you've been through that entire spectrum. So do you have any message for women who either face guilt due to a situation or circumstance, or just, in that whole trap of, finding something to feel guilty about?
I want to know whether this is guilt in the context of suicide loss, or are we talking of any other kinds of guilt?
I think I'm not sure if I'll be able to get that kind of a response directly, but the question said, did you feel any?
Okay.
So let me assume that for your situation, responsible.
It's a very interesting question, and something I've grappled with a lot. Per se, I did not experience guilt because I knew that I was in a very committed relationship, and I had done whatever was possible for me in my capacity as a spouse to be fully supportive of my husband, and he knew it very well. He knew it completely. So I did not feel guilt. But that said, I know that lots of women in my place experience guilt. We call it survivor guilt. because two reasons for this. A woman is traditionally perceived to be the custodian of culture and tradition in the family. And when a woman loses a partner or / husband in the institution of marriage to suicide, it's almost like it's a dereliction of her duty. She's not done what she was supposed to do, which is uphold the family honor. And suicide there's a lot of blaming and shaming of women survivors of suicide loss, and also women, mothers who've lost their children to suicide. Very, very interesting. So the important thing I'd like to reiterate in the context of suicide losses and in non-suicidal contexts as well, each of us can or is responsible only for our lives. And women especially, I think we internalize that we are responsible for everyone else in the family. Not only for their physical needs, but for their emotional needs, their psychological needs, and anything that happens to them. And especially in the context of suicide loss, a wife is supposed to be, very responsible. And this is like, you've not been responsible enough. So I think this is something we need to get completely very clear, that you cannot will your life to someone else, even if that person is your spouse or your child. You can offer support, maximum support, but decisions are made by people concerned. And nobody can outsource that to someone and say that, oh, hey, you be responsible for another person's decisions. No. And I think we need to get that very, very clear, especially women.
Each person is responsible for their own actions, and
Yes.
you are not held, you should not be held responsible for what someone else is doing or saying, even though that's the opposite of what typically tends to happen. So that's a very strong and powerful message, which I think one can never say it enough, because the women keep needing to hear that repeatedly, and only then it goes inside.
Yeah, and responsibility is different from self-blame, Mahima. I think the two are entirely different. We hold ourselves responsible, and sometimes we tend to self-blame. Women tend to self-blame, I mean, I've done that, not in this context, but anything is not okay. Oh, how have I contributed to it, even at the workplace? Oh, could it be my fault? Could it be something I've done? And this whole tendency, I think we women have this inbuilt tendency to apologize. Just like that,
Like that.
things we may not even be remotely responsible for. So I think it's those check-ins we need to build in, and I think it's all about being kind to ourselves, because I think we women, we self-flagellate so much, in across contexts, across cultures. I think for me, being part of this kindness festival is all about learning to be compassionate to yourself, learning to be kind to yourself, because only when that happens can you radiate that kindness to others. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Payal, I have a question for you from somebody in the audience. How would the visually impaired like to be treated by people with normal sight? What are the do's and don'ts? And I know that this question probably is sort of in the territory of what you talked about earlier about the handling. So we're not talking about handling, but people get awkward around something that is unfamiliar territory for them. They do not want to be different. They would like to help, but they don't know what is the right way, and invariably they end up crossing boundaries and being hurtful. So if somebody just had to ask you that blunt question, what is it? How would you like me to be? What is it that I can do or should not do? And, just guide us, please, Payal.
So, yeah, I understand. I've been asked this question many times, and most people think like we're going to, I always say that either laugh, cry, or bite. Well, there are people that are that way also. So, but I would still think that you treat us normally. There's a large cross-section of the disability community who, including people with vision impairment, who want special treatment. Let's face that fact as well. That's a very, very clear reality as well. Where that comes from, Depends on, where they're from. But in general, I would say, if you would ask me in context of vision impairment, I would tell you, please treat me normally. You realize I'm visually impaired with various cues. You might not even be able to figure out that I'm visually impaired, and you might be asking me questions and I might not be answering you because I'm not just visually impaired, I'm also partially deaf. So the safest thing to do is to either walk, to the person and tap the person on the upper arm. Don't touch a person anywhere else, please, because we are sensitive to touch and we have absolutely no idea who's coming from where. So a very gentle double tap on the with your fingers on the upper arm is usually indicative of somebody trying to get your attention. That's one very, very important thing. Secondly, I would say, if you see a person who needs something, a person not just with vision impairment, people are only, I think, limited by their ignorance, and that's a fact. So you can't blame somebody if they treat you badly and they didn't know how, as this question asks. So I would say that ask a question, ask a person. You have a person with a wheelchair or a calipers or a crutch, or you have a wheelchair user, or you have me, for instance, walking, or a sign language user, and you see them trying to figure something out. Please accord the respect the person deserves as a human being. Don't treat us like baggage. People have this tendency, if a blind person is standing to cross the road and has his cane and everything in hand and is ready to cross, people tend to think that the person needs help. So what do? They grab your arm and they pull you along. Like, like you're a cart or some piece of luggage or something like that being towed. There's absolutely no need to do that. Ask a person, are you looking for help? Is there any way that I can help you? You're according the person the respect, the agency to decide whether or not he or she wants your help. So that is extremely important. There are times that a person is lost and is looking for help, and your question will be taken very kindly and it would be timely support. But please don't just take the agency away from the person to decide what they want from you or what they don't want from you. So that helps immensely. Just normalcy. I mean, just truly, truly normalcy. That's all there is to it. And if a person reacts adversely to you, all you can do, you've done your best. Don't beat yourself over it, and just apologize and say, okay, I'm sorry that I've, in case I've disturbed you in any way, and just walk away. That's all it takes.
Okay. That sounds like very sound advice, Payal. And I think it also puts a lot of people at ease, because when you don't know what to do, when you're ignorant, like you said, then you stop breathing and then you're in a very uncomfortable space and it causes general discomfort for everyone. So thank you for that wisdom. I'm afraid we're out of time and we have to, bring this conversation to a temporary close for now, in the hope that we have sparked conversations around this, and there will be more such conversations around in every living room and, more in public domain as well. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's been, it's been such a joy to have you here, and I will pass this on back to Suresh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahima.
Thank you, Mahima. Thank you, panelists. That was an eye-opening.